Greetings and welcome to the Bowling Green First United Methodist Church. We hope that you enjoy what you're about to see, and you can find us on the corner of Broadway and Church Streets at 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings. Or you can find us at bgmethodist.org and on Facebook at Bowling Green First United Methodist Church. I know that we say that Christmas is the most wonderful time of the year, and it's true. I mean, it really is true. But I think that maybe it's a little bit less true when you marry someone who loves baseball. If Lindsay were here, I would say, she knows what I mean. Also you realize baseball season also has this tendency to be the most wonderful time of the year. And Emily even let me watch the Royals game yesterday. After the Cardinals game, of course, but she still let me watch it. So, but if baseball is a wonderful time, then there is really one movie that is the wonderful movie that goes along with that. And everywhere I've gone this morning, everyone's going, yeah, we know what one you're talking about. Not just because I put it up here, but of course is The Sandlot. And one of my favorite scenes out of a movie where there are all sorts of favorite scenes is this one.
Count is a big group. Long word. Come on, you guys. Yes, let's do it. Whoa. Good luck pitching. It's a great ball. We doing a hit! Oh yeah! This is my heater! I dare you to hit it! You'll be sorry. For the heater? I'll give it to you. And you don't get one no more. Great!
Can't go, man. Just getting rid of all tomorrow. Yeah. I'll never see it again.
Why not? The beast. What is that?
So much fun. I'm still trying to figure out, did they just have a whole bunch of extra gloves lying around that they could keep throwing at him as they were going? What's fun about this is what takes place as the story unfolds. If it's been a while since you've seen it, that is Smalls. He is the proverbial new kid. He is, he's new to town. His mother just got remarried. He's trying to make friends. He's a little bit socially awkward. He has no idea about anything about baseball. And so, he finds himself in the middle of this, trying to figure this out. And this scene begins to set up what happens next. Because what happens is, they're like, well, we need a ball. And he's like, well, I know where I can get a ball. My step, he doesn't tell them where he's getting this ball from. He's like, I've got one at home. So he goes home and he gets the ball off of in his stepfather's trophy room, off of the little pedestal. This is the autographed Babe Ruth ball. So he gets this, and they're going to play with this. So he goes up, they play, he comes up, he hits a home run, he hits the next home run that gets lost back there behind that fence, and he thinks he's in trouble. They're just like, well, no, we'll just get another ball tomorrow, it's okay. He's like, you don't understand. This was an important ball, and then one of my favorite lines in this movie is like, yeah, it was written by, it was signed by some woman named Babe Ruth. And that, of course, is where they go, oh no, we've got to get this ball back. What I love that takes place in this movie, and this is what makes a kid's movie, makes it age well so you can still watch it as adults, is there's something that happens as the story unfolds. And one of the ways this takes place is, you can see this through the change in the Beast. The Beast is the dog that is eating their balls, or so they think over there. And they go, and the Beast starts off as this big mythical creature that they are telling stories about, but none of them have really ever seen. The dog is nearly as tall as the policeman walking by it. This fantastical tale about this dog. But by the end of the movie, they actually meet the real dog, who is still a pretty big animal, but kind of friendly. He loves to chase down balls. His name is Hercules. They kind of also, something happens in the middle of that where he goes from big mythical creature to team mascot and dog that they all know. And the story of how they get there is what's important. That's the important part of this story that really changes everything, because as much as this is a movie about baseball really isn't the point of the movie. The movie is about what happens to these guys and what happens that they make this transition from kind of this mythical time into something different. And we watch as they spend their time out on the Sandlot in a summer that is, even in our own memories, we know that summers as kids are kind of crazy times where you're really just living in the moment. Going from moment to moment, you're spending with them. It was all their time out playing baseball. And it just seemed to kind of stretch on and on and on and on. And so many stories that come from that. So many stories we look back on now when we say, how did we survive? But somehow we made it through. These are all the things that happen and that take shape through that. And what happens in those stories is that generally, as a kid's story goes and is told, is that we're making this transition from kind of innocence in childhood and living in the moment into what does it mean to be a fully grown and mature adult through the midst of all of this. And so we're making kind of this transition as we go through all of these pieces. And in a kid's movie, something happens that gets everybody into trouble. And then you have to go through all of the different things to try and make it right again. They go to find, this is another great scene in the movie where they're trying to, all these different ways, and I still don't even have all of them up there, trying to get that ball back in some very creative ways. I remember at one point thinking, I don't know where I would get 3 vacuum cleaners that I could use to tie together to try and suck a baseball up out of. But somehow, they were managing this, they were trying this, and none of their things worked. And when the one that finally worked, which was them, hopping over the fence and getting the ball and then trying to run away from the dog, that brought on its own set of problems. None of what they expected to happen really happens. Anything they expect in this process of growing up doesn't really go the way that they expect it to. But that's because as kids, we don't really know what to expect when we're growing up until we actually do it. And we only do it by trying and failing at so many other different ways along the way until we learn all of those really important lessons. And the lessons that come from this are not that they found the one thing that really was going to work. What they found in the midst of this, what got them through that, was that they grew up a little bit. They matured a little bit by the time they get to the end of this, part of their story. Benny, he was the guy that was catching behind the plate. He's the one that's got the real talent. He's the one that goes on to play in the big leagues. Benny pickles the beast. He's the one that jumps the fence, grabs the ball, jumps back over, and then has to start running around town to try and outrun this great big dog. He wasn't sure he could do it. He wasn't sure he wanted to do it, but he did it, and he made it. And he made it through all of those things. Smalls, he has to grow up because he's got to face his stepfather with a Babe Ruth ball that's a little bit torn up, that's a whole lot covered in dog slobber, that has been, just kind of torn up and eaten up, and he's got to go back and tell him that your prized ball is not so prized anymore. But through that, though, through facing up to that, facing his fear, because he and his stepfather had this really kind of awkward relationship for a while. They're trying to figure this out. Through that, though, they grow. They grow together. They kind of figure out that they can have a father-son relationship, and they begin to build something because of what it is that's happened. It's this transition that takes place from this kind of living in the moment where time isn't really important, that things just kind of go, to growing up into finding a new place of maturity and having to act like an adult a little bit. That changes everything in the story. Now, last Sunday was Easter Sunday. And as we look at this story, we see that the women came to the tomb. They found that the tomb was empty. They go back to, there's an angel there that tells them, go back to the disciples and tell them what you've seen. On their way back, Jesus meets them on the road and says, go back and tell my disciples, I'm going to meet up with them along the way. And they go back and they preach the first Christian sermon ever. Probably one of the shortest ones that's ever been given either. Probably lasted about 30 seconds. It was just enough time for them to tell him that he's risen. And then the story goes on, begins to unfold. The disciples had just spent the last couple of years in the first century equivalent of the Sandlot. Kind of a mythical time where they were grown adults, but they were very young in the faith. And they were spending this time with Jesus, living in the moment where they were traveling around with him as he was performing great miracles, as he was teaching large crowds, as he was doing what all of us wish we could do to our teachers sometime, which was really to tell them what we thought. He was doing that. He was doing all of these things. And this was kind of surreal for them almost. Not something that they could really be able to quantify, but they were living in that moment, in this time that they were hoping would never, ever end. But Jesus is warning them throughout all of this as the story goes on. He's warning them and telling them, saying, there's going to be a time when this end is going to come. And here's what to expect in doing all of this. Remember, Jesus doesn't do surprises. He is preparing them for this all the way along as the story goes. And then that time comes. They're first in the upper room on Thursday night. They go out to the garden. Jesus is arrested. He is tried. He is convicted in this farce of a trial. He's taken before Pilate. He is beaten. He's marched through the city. He's crucified. He is killed. He's buried in a tomb. And they think that their world has come to a complete and a rather sudden end in that moment. But then Easter morning comes. And the women come to the tomb and they find that it's empty. They go back. And now Jesus is meeting with them. They are having their first experience with the risen Christ. Easter morning is the climax of one story, and that part of the story comes to an end, but the story moves on. it starts the next story that's going. And Jesus looks at them and reminds them, I have told you about this. And so we get this next part of the story where he looks at them, and in verse 44, he said, remember, all the things I've told you, these are my words. And then he opened their minds so they could better understand Scripture. He says, this is what is written in verse 47, and a change of heart and life, reminding them that things are going to be different going forward from here. And then what I think is probably the most important verse in this part that says, you are a witness to these things. Now, this is not a witness like a legal witness where someone's going to be tried and they're going to have to answer questions and they're going to be put under oath or anything like this. But Jesus is changing what it means to be a witness. This is a very active thing that Jesus is describing. They are witnesses to what it is that Jesus has said. They are witnesses to what it is that has gone on. In fact, this is so important that we have changed the nature of the way this word gets used inside of Christian circles because it is a very active thing. We have turned it into a verb. We say that folks are witnessing about Jesus. They are witnessing to their faith. It is an active thing that we do in going forward. We are witnesses to what it is that has happened. Jesus has taken them through this transition of where they started and kind of this place where they were watching him do all these great, amazing things, and they were living in that moment. And now he is guiding them through this transition into becoming fully grown and mature followers of his that are going to take this message out and share it with the rest of the world that is around them. He's taking them through this transition. At the end of this passage, he tells them, you aren't going to start now. You've got a little bit more time to come. But when the time comes, you will know it, and then you are going to go out and you are going to do this. This is his call to action, telling them that you are going to go out and be my witnesses and share this good news. Now, what I love at the end of the movie, we get to the end of this, and it's kind of like the epilogue to the story, where you've got to go through and you've got to tell what has happened to all of the characters in there. And so many of them are, what they are doing as grown adults has been greatly shaped and influenced by where they were on that Sandlot. One guy who gets suspended down and dropped down into, to try and grab the ball before being hoisted back up, goes on to, be one of the first folks to ever go bungee jumping. I mean, it's crazy things like that. But where they are as adults has been shaped by where they were that summer, in that place where they were learning and they were growing and they were living in that moment where nothing else really mattered except where they were. The disciples, in that same way, had found themselves what they were doing as fully grown and mature followers of Christ, taking those things that they had learned and following Jesus around Galilee for those years and throughout his ministry. And now they have been, just as we are, shaped and guided and strengthened and encouraged by what they learned there so that they can take that out now and share it with the world that is around them. This is their call to action, and it is our call to action also, to make that transition from that place on the Sandlot and going out into living that faith out and sharing that story and that good news with the folks that come around. Now, Emily said earlier, we're not going to be here next week. We're going to be down for a wedding. But when we get back, we're going to start a new series. And that series is going to take us through a series of practices that will help us to continue in that transition, to make that transition, or to give us kind of that extra exercise that we need in practicing those gifts that God gives and understanding where it is that he wants us to go so that we can be those fully grown and mature followers of Christ that take that message out and share it with the world around us that are witnesses to who Jesus is. But in the meantime, over these next couple of weeks, I ask that we do this. Spend some time in prayer, listening for Jesus' voice as we go through our lives on a daily basis, and And I ask that we listen for that voice as he is guiding us into something new. We're all going to have our own place in this. This is the great part of this story is Jesus doesn't expect us all to do exactly the same thing. Much like the guys on the field, they all played different positions, and that's what you need. We all have different places that we are called to inside of that story, but we can share in common practices that help us to take that next step out. And we can start by that, by listening for Christ's voice as he calls us to take that next step forward. Let us do all this, let us lift up those prayers, and let us be his children and do all of this in Christ's name. Amen.